Hello everyone, and welcome back to the RENSON'sYard. Yard. Today, I'm replacing this complicated carburetor by this much more simpler one. And the reason I decided to do so is that this factory carburetor has 5 vacuum inputs, coolant lines, fuel lines, and the throttle cable, which are all exposed to the elements and are getting quite rusty. Today is April 21st, 2020, and I just finished working on my truck here. This project started as a weekend project, which, due to some sort of pandemic and very questionable weather, got stretched out into a full month project. This is the current view from the engine bay. The carburetor I used to replace my factory setup is for a Yamaha Grizzly 660, and it cost me less than $100 ordered online. The air filter is washable performance filter. I use this because I already had it installed on my previous carburetor. With the factory setup, the carburetor sits tighter here against the intake manifold, but I had to space it out to let the throttle cable go through because it's facing a different direction, and it's also on the inside rather than being on the outside. But for me, that's a positive because now it won't be out in the elements, so it's protected and it's going to be all nice. But so I had to build this spacer to bring out the carburetor. This is a piece of radiator hose from the parts truck, because not only is it further out, but this carburetor has a bigger port. I believe we're sitting at 1.5 inches on this side and just over 2 inches on this side. So everything had to be made bigger than the factory setup. I also modified the air filter. I removed the factory 4-inch attachment, and I just glued a piece of plastic, like a solid plate, and then I drilled a 2-inch hole in which I put a straight piece of pipe, also added a connection here. Then I had to deal with the vents. So the crankcase ventilation vents back into the air filter as it was factory. I just had to extend this pipe, and I also had to add a T to vent this into it. I had to add a fuel pressure regulator to bring down the pressure to 2 psi. The vacuum lines, that I had to do quite a bit of work. Basically, behind this plug here is a little tree, I guess, of vacuum lines. There's 2 ins and 2 outs, and that's the thermal switch. That's what was connected to the EGR and also to the fast idle, both of which I have deleted. So right now I just remove all the vacuum lines and put a big piece of shrink tubing over the whole tree and just sealed it as is. Fuel line, that I did not have to modify. The only thing I had to do was to cap the fuel return, because this is a returnless system now. This is the choke cable, so instead of having a vacuum actuated choke, it's now a cable actuated choke. I just routed the cable along, and it comes out basically in the driver's side footwell just below the latch to remove the seat. Other vacuum lines, this is the vacuum, this is the vacuum that goes to actuate the 4x4. So I teed off of that, and that's now for the vacuum advance on the distributor. The vacuum advance does need to be connected to something, otherwise the engine will knock. So that's where I used my vacuum from. This actuator is still plugged in, but there's no vacuum that goes to it. So I believe this is for the fast idle. The coolant lines. So there's two sets of coolant lines that went to the carburetor. I just looped each pair back upon itself. And now, I guess the question everyone's asking is, what did it do for performance? I've only driven this once. So basically, I got it done, went for a little test drive around the block, drove good, and then I drove it into town. Well, today, drove it to town and back. So, you know, I got maybe 10 kilometers on it. What I noticed is I have less throttle response. Like the throttle is proportional to the vacuum or something like that. So, I guess the benefit of that is the throttle is less touchy. So it keeps its speed better. And yeah, that's what I've observed. Actual power-wise, I do have a better control over my idle. So now I brought my idle down a bit, so that I imagine will be good for fuel economy. Top speed, I haven't done a top speed run, but from what I could observe, like going to town from here, there's a few hills, and I used to have a hard time sustaining above 80 kilometers an hour going up those hills. Like the engine was just bogged down and really didn't like it. Now, when I get up to 80 kilometer an hour, instead of feeling like I'm dragging a boat anchor, it feels like I have a good steady wind from behind. So like just a free push. And I imagine the peak torque or peak power of this new carburetor is different from the old one. So the way that it interacts with the gearing, that's the impression I have. I guess I can show you, the vacuum diagrams again. So this is basically the diagram I found from a forum online. So that's what this person did. That's what I got inspired from. And this piece, they had 3D printed. So if you have access to a 3D printer and you can print out the whole thing, hey, that's probably the best way to go, because I really had to fiddle quite a bit and made multiple attempts. You know, first I tried to make it out of plastic, that didn't hold, and I went to metal, and I still had to fiddle quite a bit to get the air filter in. But if you can do it this way and you have a snarkle or something like that, by all means go for it. This is the diagram from the original four-wheeler that shows where everything is plumbed to. So you see you have your the vent here that's on top of the carburetor that goes back into the air intake, and the little ports on the side are just vented to atmosphere. So that's how I know I did it correctly. Now, one thing I noticed while I was doing this is that my carburetor didn't quite match this. So the vehicle I have is a Suzuki Carry DD51T. The reason I say that is that the back of the carburetor, where the choke and the throttle cable are connected to, on the trucks, if my understanding is correct, is that that section is meant to be open. And I had half of a box that was meant to enclose that. So I only had the bottom half, which was the absolute worst, because then it would just fill up with water and snow and ice and everything. So I really wanted to delete that, and the only way to do it was to remove the carburetor entirely. So if you do have a truck, a DD51T, do let me know in the comments if I'm correct on that, or do all the DD51Ts have a box around the back of the carburetor, basically. So this is what you should be looking at. Thermal switch, on this diagram, it only has 2 ports, an input and 1 output. I had 2 inputs and 2 outputs, because my there was a basically line from the idle switch and the thermal switch, like those interact together. Now I did bypass all of that. I only have the distributor, which is teed off the vacuum switch for the 4x4, and I did test it 4x4 on or off. There's always there's a constant vacuum on that. So the fact that the 4x4 is in one or the other position does not affect the distributor. It was a convenient source of vacuum for me because all the rest has been removed. Yeah, except the charcoal canister, which instead of being, I guess, off a vacuum port, it's just off of a free ventilation port from here, just so it's not, you know, venting directly to atmosphere. I guess overall conclusion, would I recommend this swap? I can't just say, yeah, it's a great idea, do it. If you're a handy person and you have access to, if you have a more easy access to a bunch of random plumbing bits than you do to proper Japanese parts, it might be your best option, because cost-wise, this project cost me less than $100. I guess that's about it. If you have any questions, definitely leave them in the comment, and I'll get to them. Even, you know, if it's in 5 years from now, I'll still try to get to them. You know, questions, if you want links to the diagrams, I'll see what I can do about that. And yeah. Oh, this I never actually explained. Why do I have, like, basement waterproofing membrane all over my truck? The reason is, it's just cheaper than sound deadening product. That's it. It cuts down the vibration, keeps out the water, works for me. We had, you know, extra laying all over, does a trick. It doesn't like the heat. I did try to put some in the engine bay and that kind of melted, but for, you know, cab applications, you can get it in giant rolls, so they're not that expensive, and it sticks on pretty good. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed, and that this video wasn't too hard to follow. As usual, thank you so much for watching, and if you got anything to say, leave it down in the comments. See you next time.